Blake saw the girl first, not in the way people see a child in passing. A quick glance between errands or a kid waiting quietly outside a store. He noticed her, like she didn't belong to the frame she was standing in. 12, maybe 13. Torn hoodie, dust on her knees, her left shoelace dragging in the wind like it hadn't been tied in weeks. Her mom stood beside her, gripping a reusable grocery bag like she was still deciding whether to run or explain. They weren't doing anything, just standing near the sidewalk, frozen in a kind of silence that only comes after something has gone terribly wrong. Blake wasn't the only one watching, but he was the only one who listened. Because before the woman with the perfect phone pulled it out of her coat and dialed 911 with practiced disgust, the girl turned to him just for a second and whispered, a question no one had ever asked out loud in this neighborhood. Why did she call the cops before we got here? The air changed. You know that feeling you get when you realize you're not alone in a room you thought was empty? That's what Blake felt, except they were outside and the sun was still high, and nothing should have felt that wrong. But it did, and it only got worse when the sirens came too fast.
Not 4 minutes, not 5.
1. Like they were already. Around the corner, people say you shouldn't make assumptions about what you see. No. But that rule breaks down when what you're seeing doesn't make sense. The girl never moved after that question, didn't flinch, didn't speak again. She just stared at the cop, who stepped out of the car like he recognized her, but not the way you'd recognize a neighbor. The way you'd recognize someone from a photo you weren't supposed to find. What happened next? You're not ready. Because as the officer stepped forward, hand already grazing the gun on his hip, the girl reached into her hoodie and pulled out something small, silver and flickering. Not a weapon, not a phone, a recording device. Old, like cassette old. And it was already playing. One voice came out. Not hers. Not her mother's, not the officer's. It was a voice no one had heard in 15 years because the man who spoke it had died in federal custody in 2009, and somehow it said Blake's name. He hadn't told anyone he was here. He wasn't on any list. But now he was standing between a girl who didn't belong and a truth too heavy to carry alone. He looked down. The girl was gone. Only the device remained, still playing, and the tape hadn't started yet. Blake stared at the spot where the girl had been nothing, not even footprints. The cassette player in his hands whirred, faint and mechanical. Like it was waking up from a long sleep it had no business surviving. A soft click, then static, then silence, then... Blake, you were never supposed to follow this far. A pause, and then laughter, not cruel. Familiar. That voice. That laugh. His legs buckled, just slightly, like his body remembered something. His mind refused to. He hadn't heard that voice in over a decade, and even then it had only lived in the background of old tapes. Court testimonies and hospital hallways. Clyde Everett, former federal informant, found dead in a holding cell. In 2009, suicide by hanging, or so the file said. Blake had read the file, signed it actually, but the voice wasn't from an old tape. There was no distortion, no warping. It wasn't archived. It was recent, present. Like Clyde was still somewhere close, watching. This moment had been orchestrated. The world slowed. The cars passed behind him, but the noise felt submerged, like his ears were underwater. His fingertips tingled from holding the recorder. His breath felt hollow. And all around him, people just moved on. The cop car had left one. He didn't know. The crowd had dispersed. The mother, the daughter, gone. Not a trace. No badge numbers, no names, no license plates. Like they'd all vanished behind a door Blake hadn't seen close. The only thing he could hear now was the tape. You erased the wrong day, Blake. That's where everything started. That's why you're still bleeding. His hand jerked. He hadn't noticed he was bleeding, but he was. A thin line across his palm. Like paper, or glass, or tape. He looked again, no visible edges, no sharp points, just blood, welling slow. His thoughts spun into places he didn't let them go any, more like the therapy sessions he quit halfway through. The files he kept hidden behind a password even he didn't fully remember, the calendar gaps that made no sense unless something was missing from inside him. He pressed stop on the recorder. It kept playing another voice now, younger, soft, female. He was one of the ones who watched. He didn't touch, but he watched. And that's why it's his turn now. The words weren't loud, but they weren't quiet either. They came from inside the device. Yes, but the sound felt like it was inside his skull, crawling along the folds of his brain like it knew the paths already. He wanted to throw it, stomp it, crush it, end it, but he did. Instead, he turned around. That's when he saw her. Second person, not the girl, not her mother, not Clyde Dot. Erin, she was standing across the street wearing a coat he remembered. Burning 5 years ago. Same tear on the left sleeve. Same missing button. Erin looked not older, not younger, just wrong. It's like a wax replica made from memory. He hadn't seen her since the breakdown, since the institution. Since the night she said they weren't accidents, Blake. They were tests. And now here she was, looking calm, blinking too little, holding a phone that wasn't turned on.
What?
Watching. Him, he stepped off the curb, forgetting traffic. A horn screamed past him, but she didn't flinch. She just smiled. Erin, he croaked, but it came out dry, brittle, like the word had expired in his throat. She tilted her head. Do you remember the basement, Blake? The breath caught in his chest. What? Where you used to go after your father's episodes? Where you made your tapes? I don't you do. He felt cold. Not the shivering kind. The hollow kind. Like someone had scraped the warmth from his organs. I burned them, he said. No, she smiled. You burned copies. You buried the originals. Tape recorder in his pocket clicked. He hadn't put it in his pocket. He hadn't even moved. I'm not here, Erin said. Her voice suddenly whispered close. But she was still standing across the street. I've been gone 7 years. I died in 2018, Blake. You signed the papers. You picked the dress I was buried in. No, he whispered. No, that was part of the trial you're confusing me with. She interrupted him by laughing. A short, human burst of sound that shattered him. You really think any of this is about the trial? Another click. The world pulsed. It was a sound he'd heard before, in the security archives, in those missing time. Blackouts they always blamed on system errors. Click it. Wasn't a glitch. It was a command. He staggered backwards into himself, into memories he'd buried under court testimonies, sealed affidavits, and years. Just darkness, no lights, no exit. Only the door, only the voice, only the sound of something beginning to knock. From the inside, Blake hadn't moved in hours. Or maybe it had only been a few minutes. Time had become a looped film reel flickering, stuttering, burning at the edges ever since he woke up outside the red door, with no memory of how he got there, and a new scar along his ribs. Fresh enough to sting when he breathed too deep. He'd been sitting with his back against the cold wall of a building he couldn't name, in a neighborhood that felt almost familiar, like an old dream barely remembered. Across from him, a mirror shop, closed, every pane reflecting him slightly wrong, his face looking older, his eyes darker. In one window, his reflection blinked when he didn't. That should have been the sign, but Blake thought it was over. Wanted to believe it was over, because sometime before dawn, he'd found a file, slipped under his arm like a hospital discharge folder. No note, no label. Just a hard plastic envelope containing a single photograph, the girl from the sidewalk, the one who had vanished. But this time, she was younger, maybe 5, standing in front of a farmhouse, holding a stuffed rabbit by its ear. Barely visible through a screened window was the silhouette of a man with no face. And on the back of the photo, one sentence scribbled in a child's hand. He told me to call 911 before we got there, so they would take you instead. It felt like a confession, twisted map pointing to the truth. And for the first time since the voice on the tape said his name, Blake felt clarity. There was someone behind all this, a person. Not a ghost, not a glitch, not some psychic scar, but a man. A handler, a watcher, a manipulator who had pulled The threads of this unraveling tapestry for years, possibly decades. The theory felt clean, solvable, safe. He broke into the Federal Records Archive that afternoon, used his old clearance, long expired, but still somehow active. That should have been another sign. But hope makes people blind, and he wanted to see it through. Inside the records room on the shelf where the tapes were kept, he found what he'd been avoiding, the Utah anomaly box. Marked evidence from the investigation of Site Redacted 64, a shutdown behavioral study buried. In bureaucratic silence, Blake hadn't been involved in the original team, but he'd seen the names. His name. Aaron's, Clyde's, all listed as observers on projects they'd never officially joined. Inside that box, tucked between affidavits and medical logs, was another photo, but this time it wasn't the girl. It was him. Age 9, sitting at a long metal table, staring at a door painted red. Behind him, through a scratched two-way mirror, stood a dark figure, unidentified, faceless, watching. Blake couldn't remember this photo being taken. He couldn't remember any of this, but his handwriting was on the back, just 3 words. It remembers me. He dropped the photo like it burned. The air grew heavier. Static buzzed somewhere deep in the vents. A low hum like a broken speaker caught mid-feedback, pressed at the base of his skull. He stumbled out of the building, clutching the photo, the file, the fragments of his own unraveling mind. That night, it came together. All of it. Aaron wasn't hallucination. She was a reinsertion. A fragment they'd placed into his timeline, to see if memory could be overwritten through emotional imprint. The girl wasn't random, she was a catalyst. A carrier of encoded trauma meant to trigger buried memories through auditory suggestion. The voice on the tape wasn't Clyde's ghost. It was a construct built from repurposed interviews Blake had conducted in 2008, recombined by software flagged for psychological manipulation. He found the software name in a whistleblower. Memo buried in an encrypted drive he hadn't touched in years. Project, Vain Voice, Automated Neural Coding. It had been shut down in 2012, not because it didn't work, because it did. Blake sat on the floor of his apartment, surrounded by the evidence he thought would break the mystery open, and for a moment, he felt something strange, relief, because this meant he wasn't crazy. There was a system, a test, a structure built to break him, yes, but it had rules. And if it had rules, it had limits. He leaned back against the couch, laughing breathlessly. Then his phone buzzed. He hadn't charged it in days. He picked it up anyway. A new voicemail. No caller ID. Timestamp 2 minutes ago. He pressed play. You're not crazy, Blake. They lied to you. He froze. Not because of the message, but because of the voice. It was his, but not recent. Not like he'd just recorded it. It was his voice from age 9, and he remembered where it came from. That day in the basement. The first day he found the red door. He'd been alone. Recording into a toy cassette deck. Whispering secrets he never meant anyone to hear. You're not crazy, Blake. They lied to you. The girl is me. I'm the girl. Static tore through the message. The voice distorted into a scream, and then silence. No voicemail existed in his inbox, no call log entry, no temic, just a pulsing tone from the speaker, one continuous sound. A frequency Blake had felt before but never consciously heard. It triggered something in his jaw. His molars ached, his eyes blurred. He saw the carpet folding into waves like static was crawling through the fabric of his home. He dropped the phone, and the world collapsed. Or maybe he did, because when he opened his eyes again, he was sitting. In the farmhouse, the one from the photograph. Same peeling wallpaper, same warped wooden floors, same heavy silence that felt too thick to breathe through. On the wall in front of him, dozens of photographs, his face in every single one, at different ages, different places, watching different people. One photo showed him looking at Aaron, another at the girl, another at Clyde, but in each, his eyes were the same, wide, glassy, inclining. He stumbled forward, and behind the photos a door revealed itself. Red faded now, splintered with time, but unmistakable. And in the silence behind it, a sound like breathing. He reached out, hand shaking, then stopped, because on the floor beneath the door was a pair of shoes, tiny pink, rabbit dash themed, and they were facing away from the door, like someone had walked through barefoot or had been dragged. His stomach turned. He looked behind him. The hallway he'd come from didn't exist anymore, just more walls. More photos. All showing him. He opened the red door. Inside was a single television screen, playing footage from the street the moment the girl had vanished. But this time, it showed what happened after she disappeared. It showed Blake collapsing. It showed paramedics arriving. It showed a sheet being pulled over his body, and behind the crowd, in perfect clarity, stood the girl, smiling, holding the recorder next to her, were Aaron, wearing the same coat, the same smile, and one step behind them, blurry, but visible for the first time, a third figure, tall, still faceless, watching from the beginning. And as the screen crackled, and Blake screamed without sound, one final sentence printed across the monitor in glowing digital text. "This isn't a memory, it's a recording." Then black. Blake wasn't alone. It didn't happen all at once, the realization. It seeped in like water through floorboards long since warped by something rotting beneath them. First came the dreams, short, flickering scenes that didn't belong to him. A woman in Nebraska waking up to a voice whispering her own name from inside her baby monitor. A man in San Diego finding a childhood toy he never owned but remembered breaking. A teenager in Georgia sketching the same red door every night, swearing she'd never seen it before until she did. In the background of a 30-year-old FBI crime scene photo uploaded by a user who had since disappeared. Then came the messages. Not phone calls, not emails, pages. Torn from spiral notebooks, folded tight, left on benches, inside bathroom stalls. Taped to the back of mailboxes. Handwritten notes in smeared black ink, in barely legible loops, like the writer was shaking. The whole time, some of the letters were addressed to B. Others too, Observer 5. One just said, "You're not supposed to wake up during the broadcast." Blake thought he was losing his mind, but the city changed with him. Street names he'd known for years spelled differently now. Millbrook Ave became Millbrook. The deli on 9th that had closed in 2013 had somehow reopened on. He asked the new owner how long they'd been there. The man looked at him, confused, and said, "We never left. You left." And then handed Blake a napkin without breaking eye contact. No sandwich, just a napkin. On it, scribbled in dark red ink, "Found footage from 20 years ago. You were right all along. Watch it backwards." He didn't sleep that night, not because he was scared, but because the sound had returned. The static. Not from a screen, but from inside his own head. Low, endless hiss, like something was tuning in through the back of his eyes. He blinked and saw symbols in possible shapes, half geometric, half biological, flashing in the corners of his vision. He tried drawing one, and the second he finished the final line, the power went out in his entire building. The next morning, everything in his apartment had shifted 5 inches to the left. He wasn't the only one watching anymore. There were others. In an anonymous message board archived from a Tor-hidden service, he found a thread titled "Children Who Saw the Door." There were hundreds of replies. Most had been deleted by moderators, but some lingered cryptic logs. All formatted the same way. ID 44, red door scene, age 7. Dream lasted 21 minutes. Woke with bruises on the left side. Memory wipe incomplete. Attempted deletion logged. I still remember the password. Hollow Pines. ID 92, same. Door was open, saw 3 inside. 1 had my face. Idea 1. Stop posting here. They use the timestamps to sync the loops. Every post resets the scan, and then buried in a reply chain with no usernames. If you're seeing this, Blake, you made it through layer 3. Don't look at reflections. They learn. Blake's throat dried as the cursor blinked beneath that line. No way someone knew his name in this thread unless they weren't writing to him now, unless the message was planted years ago. And the thread was waiting for him to arrive, what the government never released. One user had written, wasn't what was inside the red door. It was who was behind it. It wasn't one of them. It was one of us. That phrase returned again, and again, one of us. Oh. But no one ever said who. It became clear that Blake wasn't being followed by something foreign, something monstrous. Was being remembered by something that had known him since before memory. Something that didn't move through space, but through identity. Something that slipped behind faces and waited. That was when the observer made contact. No name, no title. Just a note slipped under Blake's door at exactly 4:44 a.m. It's written on official paper from a defunct psychiatric hospital in Illinois. The ink shimmered. Every word was slightly out of alignment, like a copy of a copy of a copy of something. Once whole, the message read, "Your file ends in 1999. That's why you don't remember your mother's voice. I've seen your tapes. You weren't supposed to survive the 4th exposure. You did. That's why you're blinking in the wrong frame. I can help, but I'm not here to fix anything.
Ow.
I'm here to show you what they turned you into." First, Blake thought it was a threat, till he turned the note over and saw a Polaroid photograph, faded, damaged by time. It was a shot of a control room, dozens of monitors. Dozens of versions of him, all watching different screens. In one, he was crying. In another, grinning. In another, motionless. In the largest monitor, the one closest to the foreground, the live footage was crystal clear. It was Blake right now, holding the photograph, looking directly at the camera. He dropped it. The observer had sent more than a message. They had sent proof. Someone was recording all of this. It's not from the outside. From the inside of Blake's life-cutting and splicing scenes, as if memory were just another kind of media. Glitches weren't mistakes. They were edits. He began seeing marks. Small ones. Carved into bus stops. Scratched onto elevator walls. Spray-painted under bridges. Always the same symbol. A half-closed eye with 7 vertical lines slashed through. At first it meant nothing. But one day, walking past a pawn shop, he saw it on a vintage television set in the window. The screen was off, but the symbol burned faintly behind the glass. He stepped closer. The screen turned on